Book discussion, The Sportswriter, a novel by Richard Ford. This is the first installment of a series of novels that he wrote about his character, Frank Bascombe. Sort of a continuous story about this man that is in this first installment, so the Sportswriter. He is the Sportswriter, and his life is kind of, I would say, stranded. It's like the wave has broken on the beach and the water is splashing into the sand, and it's kind of, it's not going forward, it's sinking into the sand, but then there is another wave coming, there is some energy left. It's not clear where things are going. Is this man desperate? Is this man optimistic? Is he pessimistic? Is he successful? Is he not successful? I think Ford paints, actually, if I think about it, a postmodern picture of a man. The novel is, I don't know when it was written, but the story is sort of in the 1970s. So it's peak postmodernism. There is kind of no objective quality to this man. This is also sort of the Richard Ford 50 years after the Mann, ohne Eigenschften version, or it's postmodernism. So the Mann, ohne Eigenschften by Robert Musil starts this process of a person that is intangible, that has no particular qualities, no particular desires or necessities, but keeps living and actually takes life, as Ford says in the novel, literal. So it's actually what happens that matters. But then there is a part, and Ford leaves that open, and I think this is the postmodern part of it, where he leaves that little window of imagination open, and that opens up a plethora of possibilities. And that's why this man is intangible in a sense, or in a sort of Musil's way, a man without qualities. It's not clear what he is. So in that sense, I think it's a continuation of a trend that started in the sort of first part of the 20th century and culminates towards the end of the 20th century in peak postmodernism, where we have we can't really pin ourselves down, right? So there are many, many themes in this book around the sportswriter. There is the theme of success, the Harvard business grad, the investment banker. There's the theme of the woman that turns lesbian and becomes a new ager, or in today's terms, a left-wing liberal, vegan, progressive, whatever person. There's the right-wingers, the gold standard, let's go back to original forms of living types of people. There's the family man, of course, the family man in the traditional sense, but then also the family man in more, maybe more modern sense, or postmodern sense, and which is what Frank Bascombe is. He's a man that loves his kids, but absolutely has no accountability, no relationship with them. So it's almost a transcendent fatherhood, where he's a father in principle and not actually, even though, again, he's a literal person. So what is. So what is that he is a father of kids, and he loves them, but he also doesn't care for them as much as maybe you would expect a father to care. He doesn't take them on a trip to Lake Erie. He chooses to do something completely different. Go down to Florida, spend time on a swimming pool, have sex with young girls. Now, let me talk a little bit about, this is a very complex book. I mean, Ford is an incredibly intellectual, hardcore, cerebral writer. This is one of those books where every sentence can be a book in itself. So it's a very deep, very, very dense book. And I'm trying to sort of get the gist together. First, not much happens in this book. So this is not a thriller or a story in any way, in a sense. It's a novel, so there's a story here. Things happen, but it's almost irrelevant what actually happens. The only thing that matters is that something happens. And over time, and this is also a little bit Ford's style of writing, it's so dense that the content, the ideas take over, and the content almost loses importance. So people die, people get divorced, they fight, they hit each other. It's like almost a sideshow. So there's a scene in the book where they make fun of hockey, where they say a fight was going on and then a game broke out, and it's like almost like um, thinking was happening and then life broke out. Like it's like the thinking or the imagination of Frank Bascombe and the story of the book takes over, and then there's also a narrative breaks out, like actual things happen, but they don't matter as much. So in that sense, I think it's a very interesting book. It's a very aggressive style, I would say. It's definitely postmodern in that sense, and different than, let's say, what we would read today. Also different than, let's say, a Steinbeck or a Hemingway, although there's a cameo appearance by Hemingway's The Sun Always Rises. And I think the main theme of the book is purpose. Now, with all that I just said, you have this impression that this person drifts through life. He's not quite at the end yet. He's not quite finished. He's not cynical. He's not given up. And Ford's style is very tricky. Like he has this thing where he would, let's say, be cynical about a man, like let's say an investment banker who dresses up, goes to work every morning, does financial modeling, brings back a paycheck, comes back to his wife, and that's okay. Like, you're expecting a cynical remark, or you're expecting the author's discontent with this situation. Vicky is possibly going to become a lesbian new ager. Well, she has the choice to do that, and it's actually interesting to be around women that change their sexuality. Like he gives you this cynical opposition, and then you expect the intellectual author to be critical about it, but then he just lets it go. Say, yeah, it's fine. Why not? So he has this openness. I think that, again, that's very postmodern, right? Anything goes. Like, what's the big deal? Like, there's no objective truth. There's no objective purpose in that sense. So anything goes. And this is, of course, the big problem with postmodernism and relativism in general. Okay, if you're open to everything, if you're pretty much accepting life as it is, then what is the overarching purpose? Is there any overarching purpose? And I think the Sportswriter as a theme, and actually a very interesting topic, and it's very inspiring. Actually, I thought, I'd love to write a book about a business writer or a filmmaker or a skier or a swimmer. Like, it's actually interesting to take a person that does something, let's say, a professional swimmer. I once saw a documentary about Ian Thorpe, a famous Australian swimmer, and the documentary's name was The Swimmer. And it's like, what is the life of a swimmer actually about, or what is the life of a investment banker actually? How does it actually look like? Now, you might choose more interesting and less interesting topics. Maybe the life of a plumber isn't that interesting. And I think that's part of the theory. It's very interesting how Ford plays with this. Like anything goes, anything is potentially interesting, but then there are things that aren't interesting. Like his interview with her doesn't go anywhere. There's nothing to write about. That story doesn't make sense because Herb is crazy. So there is in all this non-objective relativistic gibberish that we live in, there is still something. There is a demarcation line between crazy and normal. There is a quality. So this is, and this is a bit of a contradiction. I think that's the problem with postmodernism in a nutshell. You can go very far. And, I have friends. I remember one of my better friends, sort of in my college years, he was an aggressive Derrida and Foucault type person who would say things like, well, love is just egoism. Everything's a power game, and there's nothing here. It's all about money and power. Yeah, okay, fine. But you still have a demarcation line. Like, you still have grief and love and joy. And as, a beautiful line in the book says, go explain that with quarks and quantum physics, right? So go scientifically explain to me what grief actually looks like, or love. Now, this man, Frank Bascombe, he's constantly in pursuit of love, but it's I think the dark side of postmodernism, because this man has no real love. He has lust, so he's driven by lust, and maybe even worse, he's not even driven by lust, but driven by the fear of loneliness. So there is something. In the end, we all have something. Elon Musk has a fear of loneliness. The richest man in the world is afraid of being lonely and abandoned by people. The retail shareholders of Tesla are threatening to abandon Tesla. I'm sure that hurts him. Couldn't care less, but it still hurts him. Like abandonment, fear, lust. Like there are some overarching themes in a life that are waypoints. They're not just relativistic possibilities, potentials. There are some constants, if you will. And I think this is what comes across here very well in this book. Now let me talk a little bit about the Sportswriter. I want to spend a little bit of time because to me this was very inspiring to pick a theme, like I said, about a particular person. I don't want to say profession. I don't like that word, but a person that writes about sports. What is his life about? What does that actually mean? So first of all, sports is a metaphor for the irrelevant that matters. It's a contradiction, very beautiful postmodern, right? You can have total irrelevance and still care about it, which is what sports is all about. We do care about sports, and it's not irrelevant. I would say there's a lot more irrelevant things, whether Apple's earnings are good this quarter or not is a lot less relevant than who wins the World Cup. Now, you might say, no, that's not true, because these things have, yes, of course, business has an effect on real life, but we don't see it that way. That's the thing. We don't see it like as a human race, as a collective human race. We don't think that Apple's earnings are that important, but then somehow it's like almost we should think it's important. Or take another thing, climate change, right? Nobody cares about climate change. How many people have tuned in to watch the World Cup final? Or how many people are going to watch tonight's UFC fight between Islam Makhachev and whatever his name is, the Irish guy, Gary or something? And how many people are watching whatever, a presentation by the Davos meeting on climate change? Up to zero, other than people who have to professionally or have a skin in the game somehow. So that's what the Sportswriter is about. He has an impact on people's lives. And this is, I think this transcends a little bit I'm not sure Ford wanted to go there, but I spent quite a bit of time thinking about what's the purpose of let's say, a job, what's the purpose of a company. And I think there's a massive, massive gap between what we think the purpose is and what actually the purpose is. And that's also what investing is all about. Here, I close the circle here for people who wonder, why am I talking about books here? I've said it many times. Hopefully by now you know why we're talking about books. If not, we at Orange Capital Partners want to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. That's why we have this podcast. And we talk a lot about books because reading books is not just a pastime of a hedge fund manager. It is part of the business because it helps you think, and you're in the business of thinking. Now, back to, the purpose of a company, the purpose of a job is very often not exactly what we think it is. Now, I was a journalist myself, so I can definitely relate to the Sportswriter. I was a stock market writer, which would be a beautiful sort of cousin of the Sportswriter because it's the same exact thing, right? You write about the stock market. Everybody wants to read your stuff. Everybody cares about the stock market, but it's irrelevant. The daily moves of the stock market are irrelevant, even when they're 20%. They're irrelevant. Nobody cares what happened 3 weeks ago with the Dow Jones, in principle, right? But then still, everybody listens, everybody reads about that stuff. Now, maybe today they don't read anymore in my newspaper, they read online, the Yahoo Finance and all that stuff. But you bet people care about stock prices. And it's a little bit like stock prices are like sports results. You just want to know them, even though they don't matter. So there's this dichotomy between interest and irrelevance. And that's what the sports writing really beautifully metaphorizes. Now, there are some, let's say, subtle ideas here, for sure. For example, we can write about a man who was successful and now he's not anymore. Typical story of an athlete. We can talk about injuries. We can talk about rebounds. We can talk about teamwork, all that stuff. But as Ford alludes in those passages, he has a pretty low opinion of these sort of headline themes that come along with sports writing, like the team and all that kind of stuff. But still, aren't you interested to know why Spain is such a good team as a national football team? And why the US is not able to create successful soccer teams? I'm talking about soccer here, sorry, football, soccer. American football is American football, and football is what we call soccer. So football, again, why aren't the Americans able to have more successful teams? So aren't you interested in those types of things? And I think, Ford leaves the door open for that. Says, look, there is a purpose for sports, but that's not really the purpose. In fact, the purpose of sports writer is to entertain people. The same way the purpose of a stock market writer is to entertain people. That's the real purpose. Because people want to be entertained. People want to pay attention to something, which is what entertainment really is. I could keep talking about this book. Like I said, it's a very dense book. There's a lot of themes here, and I might do another episode. I want to keep those episodes in a reasonable length. So let me summarize the book here. It's the story of a man who writes about sports. The sport is the metaphor for the irrelevance, the perceived irrelevance of something, and still something that everybody pays attention to. This is I would say, a peak postmodern type book where you can't pin this person down. There's no actual value system being conveyed here. Anything goes, but then there are still certain waypoints, certain fixed points, or something that actually matters in the context of a person's life. try to explain love, grief, happiness with quantum physics. You can. So those are the kinds of things that literature tackles. Philosophy maybe tries, but literature really captures really well. And this book is an attempt to bring those things to surface, not necessarily to explain them. And I'm very curious to see what else Richard Ford wrote. Also, the point of purpose, he brings up Hemingway as an existentialist, about 60 years before this novel was written. That's when Hemingway wrote. So in those 60 years, I think what changed is that the people in the early parts of the 20th century, they still had a notion of, we're looking for some real purpose here. We just don't know what it is. And we sometimes get disillusioned, but we keep searching. And then we find it in the tragedy and the beauty of life, which is love and death and fight and war and bullfights and things like that. I think 60 years later, in Richard Ford's time, that has sort of transcended into, we still love the fight and we're still obsessed with love, but it's not so clear which kind of fight we're actually looking for. Is it the fight in us? Is it the fight between us and the loved ones, or the actual wars and fights? And maybe fighting, as innate as it is not really what matters. What really matters is love. But sometimes we need to fight to get to that point. Maybe that's kind of the way it's these more rigid forms of purpose that Hemingway portrayed. I'm going to actually reread the Sun Also Rises right after this book. But these rigid fixed points are being softened. They're still there, but they're a lot more blurred. It's not so clear anymore what actually are those waypoints. They're still within the context of love. So it's more like in quantum physics, right? You have a probabilistic explanation of reality. So there's a high likelihood that we will all feel similar around love and hate and grief. But it's not so clear what that exactly means for each person. Thank you.